the results of the meeting between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were actually incredibly historic in nature as well. So of course this meeting was meaningful in the political sense, diplomatic sense, just for taking place at this moment. But there were multiple agreements that were signed between them that are going to make a huge difference in how this world order is shaped. So let's go over them. So RT reported this, and they called it historic. And that's what Chinese media is saying. That's what Russian media is saying. I mean, this is a consensus. This is how Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping framed it in their articles amongst each other in the respective medias of Russia and Chinese media. So they aim to promote trade and multipolarity through these deals. And here we go. So Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Chinese guest Xi Jinping have signed more than a dozen documents on increased cooperation in fields ranging from trade and industry to science and the military. The two leaders also touch on the prospects of peace in Ukraine. This is an example of how world powers who are permanent members of the UN Security Council and have special responsibility for maintaining stability and security on the planet should interact, Putin said at the ceremonial dinner following hours-long talks at the highest level in the Kremlin. As part of the toast, the Russian president quoted from the I Ching, the Book of Changes, to say, the Russian and Chinese people have a common soul and can overcome any obstacle with joint strength. Speaking to reporters after the talks, Putin said the relations between China and Russia were at their highest point in history and that trade and economic cooperation were a priority of both governments. So here we go. Here is what was signed. China's trade hit a record high with Russia in 2022, growing by 30% as the West tried to embargo Moscow. Bilateral trade is on pace to hit over $200 billion this year, though 2/3 of it have been denominated in yuan and rubles as both countries move away from the dollar. Putin has endorsed the use of yuan in trade settlements with other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. She also discussed increasing the scale of trade, further developing logistics and cross-border infrastructure, expanding agricultural cooperation to ensure food security for both countries, improving cooperation in the exchange of energy, minerals, metals, and chemical products. China and Russia pledge to expand cooperation in the fields of technology, information tech, and AI. By joining our rich scientific materials, potentials, and production capabilities, Russia and China can become world leaders in the fields of information tech, network security, and artificial intelligence. So, I mean, that's going to be huge here because China has advanced faster than Russia in some areas. Russia has focused a lot on military means technologically as well. We're about to get to a military partnership. So these two countries integrating technologically is huge. If these two countries succeed in advancing to the point where they become more even, then we don't even know what kind of ramifications that could have. It would be huge. So a new military partnership. Putin described relations between Russia and China as different from the military political alliances that developed during the Cold War, saying they are superior to that form of interstate cooperation and are not of a confrontational nature. Beijing and Moscow agreed to regularly conduct joint maritime and air patrols and joint exercises, develop military exchange and cooperation using all available bilateral mechanisms, and increase mutual trust between their armed forces. Fostering relations with Russia is a strategic choice China has made on the basis of its own fundamental interests and the prevailing trends of the world, she said after the first round of meetings on Monday, explaining that the two nations shared a commitment to building a multipolar world. So, I mean, again, this is not a military alliance. These two countries do not want a military alliance. They're very clear about that. But what they are also saying is that they are going to develop military ties. First of all, they're neighbors. Second of all, these two countries have common defense concerns. So even if they're not in a military alliance, you better believe they're coordinating when they have the United States and the collective West encircling them by land and by sea. This is really the crux of the military partnership that has to be noted. So in terms of the Ukraine peace proposal, this was huge. The Russian president has commended the peace roadmap proposed by China last month, saying that many of its elements can be taken as a foundation for a peaceful settlement when they are ready for it in the West in Kiev. However, Putin pointed out neither Ukraine nor its backers in the West are currently prepared to discuss peace. Representatives of the White House and the State Department have come out this week in opposition to any ceasefire in Ukraine, contradicting their own prior insistence that they would support whatever Ukraine decides. We're always for peace and dialogue, and we firmly stand on the right side of history. So again, here's that point that Russia and China and Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are making clear in this meeting that it was indeed the collective West and the United States and Ukraine that are not ready for peace, and that we are. We're ready for it. So here are the signed agreements. By Tuesday evening, the summit had produced 14 statement protocols, memoranda, and agreements. In 2 joint statements, Russia and China have pledged to deepen relations of comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction for a new era and create development plans for key areas of economic cooperation by 2030. The ministries of science signed a protocol on strengthening cooperation in the field of fundamental science research, while another protocol established a mechanism for regular presidential meetings going forward. The governments in Moscow and Beijing agreed to cooperate in producing joint television programming, with the Russian public broadcaster VGTRK and the China Media Group signing a memorandum of cooperation. State news agencies TASS and Xinhua also agreed to exchange information. 6 additional memoranda of understanding touched on trade, forestry, agriculture, consumer protections, and infrastructure in Russia's Far East. Rosatom and Chinese Atomic Energy Agency agreed to a comprehensive program of long-term cooperation in the field of fast neuron reactors and closing the nuclear fuel cycle. Ahead of Xi's trip, he and Putin published opinion articles in their country's flagship newspapers. The Chinese president has invited Putin to visit Beijing later this year for the 3rd Belt and Road Forum on International Cooperation. I want to add a note on that, often not spoken about, but China and Russia have been working really hard to integrate their projects for economic development. So some of you may know that Russia has a smaller, but albeit no less impactful integration model of trade, an initiative called the Eurasian Economic Union. It involves several countries in the Eurasia region and in Belarus and others that are trying to also forge a path similar to the Belt and Road Initiative that is led by China, which is signed by 140 countries. The collective West has tried to say that these 2 plans, these models, these trade networks, these infrastructure programs actually run in contradiction to each other, that Russia and China are competing with each other. Well, actually, for the last year plus, these 2 countries have been in serious talks about bringing these 2 projects together, sharing in the leadership in integration globally, and charting a different kind of globalization that respects sovereignty. And these 2 leaders, Putin and Xi, made that clear during their talks and during their statements to the press. So as you see, there was a lot agreed upon. There was a lot agreed upon. There was a lot done, a lot achieved, a lot accomplished. These 2 countries are going to build on what already is a $180 plus billion bilateral trade relationship. It's per year. It's going to be more than 200 billion per year, likely this year, 2023. And that's only going to grow. But the most important thing here is that the example that they've set is that countries in their situation, nations in their situation, right, developing, they're both considered developing countries, countries that are emerging, right? China may be this huge economy, but it's still dealing with the birth pangs and the issues of its own history. And of course, that history including meddling, warmongering, and outright interference from the United States and the collective West historically. Russia is also dealing with those problems. And so they are showing that you can become a world power out of that situation, and you can do things differently out of this situation, and it can be successful. There's nothing more threatening to a dying empire than a successful example. Nothing more threatening. And what they accomplished here in this meeting was successful, a huge success. I mean, to be able to sign these agreements, to be able to say, we're going to build upon this relationship, we're going to do better. We're not just going to sit and have a relationship that remains as it is now. No, it's going to grow by leaps and by bounds. We're going to integrate our information technology. We're going to build high technology together. There is an emphasis on culture and sports, people-to-people exchanges. We're going to accelerate that because we want our people to be peaceful together. We don't want another Sino-Soviet split ever to happen again. They're talking about friendship and solidarity at the deepest level, and nothing could be more scary. Nothing could worry and get the knees of the collective West shaking than what these two countries are doing and what they have accomplished. That is just a fact. And so when we look at, people might say on the surface, well, I thought there was going to be a peace agreement. I thought that China was going to come out of this with Russia and say, we're ready to now broker peace with Ukraine and then bring it to Zelensky. You heard what Putin said. Kiev and the collective West are not ready for it. But Vladimir Putin made it clear that he supports what China is putting forward, which is just so funny because I thought that Putin wasn't serious about peace. I thought he was the aggressor. I thought that China was just enabling Russia, when in fact, this whole time, Vladimir Putin and the Russian government has been amenable to deep concessions. I mean, the April peace plan would have been concessions, right? It would have been. They would have settled on, well, just let us protect the Donbass. Please end the fighting, demilitarize, stop the. It probably would have carried. It likely carried a lot of different concessions. It would not have satisfied everything that Russia wanted, but Russia has always been very open to ending the violence, ending the bloodshed, and getting at the bare minimum of what they want, which is an end to this escalation, this buildup, this creeping preparations for war against Russia through Ukraine. That's what they were asking for. And to protect the Russian people in the Donbass who have been slaughtered and maimed and killed for more than 8 years, plus because of the US's and NATO's support for the Ukrainian government, the nationalist far-right fascistic government in Ukraine. This is the reality. This is where things have always sat. And now Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have said, well, we see the reality. We're moving forward. We're going to continue to develop energy cooperation, military cooperation, political cooperation. We'll fight color revolutions. We'll fight sanctions together. We will build a world order based on the UN Charter, a multipolar world order. And we're going to walk the walk. We're not just going to talk the talk. We're not going to say that we respect Ukraine's sovereignty and then force them to ignore peace agreements and to drop out of peace agreements. We're not going to do that. We are going to move forward in living by the principles that we have charted out, that we have explicitly made clear. You always hear Russia and China, right? Russia and China, they are the boogeyman. They are terrible, right? That they are, that they are evil and that they're creeping to undermine, everything that is decent in the world. Well, and also they get the rap that they are not transparent, that their media is all about censorship. But then you find out that their governments act and behave and enact policy in the very ways that their media describe them as. It wasn't CGTN or RT or Global Times or TASS that has been saying that Ukraine is a democracy and the United States is fighting for democracy while they arm literal NAZIs to maim and kill Russian people. Actually, what Russia and China has been saying is we're pursuing peace. And guess what? All of their actions have actually aligned with that. If we take the April negotiations that were very close to occurring, or if we take how China has behaved even just in the last few weeks. So actually what China and Russia are doing are walking the walk. And they walked in a huge way in this Xi-Putin summit. It was a huge success, as you see, with all those agreements. And it is going to be very interesting to see how the U.S. responds to this, because the United States is incredibly unhinged. It is not going to allow a multipolar world to develop so long as it has any ammunition and firepower, metaphorically speaking, because we know in real terms, things aren't looking so good in that area. But nonetheless, this is very successful. This is huge. And we need to continue to study this and to understand it and to understand just how big of a historic moment we are living in, because it's exciting. I had someone, I was JB at RBN, Revolutionary Blackout Network, say, should I be excited about this on Twitter? And I said, yeah, you should be excited about this, because this means that we are breaking the chains, or at least Russia and China are breaking the chains along with the global south, and that we need to join in. That's why it's so significant that you have AOCs and the rest just holding military recruitment events and supporting NATO in Ukraine, right? These NATO leftists, these uh, so-called peace politicians, where they're actually just warmongers. And so that's why it's so significant. You have Joseph Borrell, calls himself a socialist. The guy literally talks in Western civilizational white man's burden jungle narratives, calling the whole world a jungle to Europe. This is a socialist, right? So this is the moment we live in. We live in a moment where the world is upside down in the collective West in the United States. Things are falling apart. The empire is crumbling. Guess what's happening on the other side of the world? Russia, China, they're rising, and their development model is very influential. Their relations with other countries is very influential. There are other countries around the world charting independent paths, and they're all coming together and saying, do we need the dollar? Do we need all this war? Do we need all this debt? Do we need the consequences of on the environment? Do we need this underdevelopment and this poverty? And they're saying, no, we don't need it. China and Russia are there to help us get out of this, and they're not telling us what to do. They're not saying we need to have this government or this politician or that politician, or that we need to abide by sanctions, or that we need to give up everything that we have just to have a relationship with you. They're not saying that. And so this is the consequences of this moment. This is how big it is. And Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin came out of this meeting victorious in so many different ways. And it is very exciting. And it will be very interesting to see what happens from here as the Ukraine conflict enters what is really a terminal stage, at least on the battlefield standpoint and in terms of its political legitimacy. I mean, terminal may be a very kind way of putting it.